Well, Mr. Dan Cap, how are you doing? All right.
I'm very good, thank you, Alan. Yeah, good to speak to you.
Like I said to you earlier, my coffee cup is a United Nations coffee cup. So I'm certainly on the payroll of the Illuminati, watching out for what's going
Where,
on the
where,
podcast.
where do you even buy something like that?
Like I said, it's a gift from
Oh, okay, yeah.
So what's going on? Getting into, I was thinking before we were talking about, or before we decided to have a conversation, that I remember a long, long time ago standing in my room, um, trying to learn to sing Solstice songs. It must have been about 2005 or 2006. Um, because me and Rich go back a long way. We go back to the early 90s with tape trading. And then when Primordial made Journey's End from Azanthropy Records, we went to the Academy Studios in Yorkshire. And I'm not sure if I've probably talked about this in the podcast before, but at the time, we didn't have much money or anything like that. And we used to stay in the Solstice house. I used to sleep on the floor in Chaz's room. And for anybody way back in the 90s, they'll know this house. It was quite a sort of semi-legendary kind of house, and they gave us the drum kit, gave us the amps, gave us all this kind of stuff. And then somewhere around about, I think maybe before or after Primordial did Gathering Wilderness, Rich sort of said to me, you want to try out for the singing? Now, I wasn't really a wasn't really that serious a prospect. But I thought, you know what? God damn it, I'd love to sing To Ride With Tear. I'd love to have a go at bashing through that. But I was having a look at you at the Prophecy Festival in the cave. So first question is the amount of fucking lyrics on some of those songs. What's going on?
Yeah. That was a real eye opener. Was and not just the amount of lyrics, but they don't really tend to repeat. And if you get a chorus, there's
Yep.
maybe only two repetitions of a chorus, and they're very, very wordy,
Yeah.
very, very wordy lyrics, which Rich is, he's great at, and it's part of what makes Solstice what it is and so great. But they're difficult to learn. Yeah, it took me a long time.
Yeah. Because my mate Justin, shout out to Justin, he was, living in the room next to me and he had to listen to me trying to sing along because I played the CD this years ago. This is 20 odd years ago. And I would, trying to sing, oh, mighty, oh, and all this, kind of, and like my memory by now is bad, but it's always been because I think it's because I've very little, my attention span has been pretty shredded. And maybe it wasn't great to begin with, but I was thinking to myself, like, obviously the prospect of singing To Ride With Tears, I was like, oh, fucking, I'd love to do that. And then looking at Cromlech or New Dark Age, I was just like, so are you like, that's, you're going for memory or you got any little secret prompts or what's the story?
No, the only thing that I will share is that in The Sleeping Tyrant, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
there's three kind of pairs of verses in that song. So you've got verse one, verse two, then you've got and then a chorus, and then you've got verse three, and then it repeats verse one again, and then in the third section you've got verse two and verse three. The first verse begins with O, the second verse begins with U, the
Okay.
third one begins with L, and then
Yeah.
you're back to OUL again. So
Okay.
I use these kind of little tricks because, particularly in that song, because you get halfway through the second verse and you're back repeating the first verse again.
Yeah.
So when we played London, which was the third show I did with Solstice, I actually lost my way a little bit and sung half of the verse wrong or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I developed these little tricks to remember my place in the song. So those are the only kind of tricks that I have really. It's all from memory, and because the recent tour of Finland we did, we busted out Only the Strong from
Okay.
Lamentations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We just did it for a couple of shows
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
special request for the
A
Finnish
great song.
fans there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Great song.
for like a week running up to that tour, I'd be sitting in bed at midnight, and I'd be like, right, okay, I'm gonna learn four lines per night, and I'd sit there and I'd learn them, and then I'd repeat them back to myself. So it can be laborious, I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it's not it doesn't come easily to me.
What I do, and I still do it with Primordial, because we have so many songs and so many, there's 130, 40 songs, and every now and again, Kieran will go, "Oh, why don't we play such and such?" And because there's not many rehearsals happen, he goes, "Oh, you sang it, you should remember it," like as if, the guys always play every chord properly. There's never to find the note. But what I do is I have a book and I put it on the drum riser, and I don't really look at the book. I don't really look at the lyrics. But what I do is I have highlighted maybe the first word of every verse. Mm-hmm. So you might have whatever the Primordial typical lyrics are. So pick a season, pick blood, pick blah, 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 blah. They sort of random word generator kind of stuff. And if I'm like there, I just have a little sneaky look back and I go, "Oh yeah, it's seasons of," or whatever, scattered something. Just a little look. And once the first word comes out, the muscle memory kicks in and it all comes out.
Yeah. It's always that first word, isn't it?
Yeah, but how you do this with a song like, as you say, Cromlech or New Dark Age, which has like, I remember looking at Dark Angel lyrics in the 1980s, Leave Scars, which had like 14 verses for the death of innocence or something like this in 5 minutes. And thinking to myself, how the fuck am I going to do this if I, the head, and you have it in your head, you're going to be singing it back and doing New Dark Age or something like this, pop was in my head for about a hot moment. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to remember this. And,
no, it is tricky, but it's a combination of little tricks and just some good old grind, just learning it, just putting in the time learning it. And as you say, it really is a thing. I think most singers would empathize with that view that it's that first word. If you've got the first word, generally you're okay. But if you're coming up to that moment where you've got to start singing and that word escapes you, then you're kind of in trouble, right? So you're having a book there with the first word highlighted is a good thing, probably as a psychological reassurance as well, because you probably don't need it, but knowing it's there, if you need that first word a couple of seconds before you're going to sing, then you can just have a quick glance. And
it's like the song from I can't remember which album it is, Wheel Lightning to Split the Sun, theoretically should be dead easy, but on my piece of paper when I look at the drum kit, it just has, it has, and who would praise, blah, 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 let the animal, and then whatever the third one is. And I just have those three, like 2-word bits. And if I'm like, what the fuck is, because the problem is this, right? I find if I have a couple of glasses of wine or a few beers or a whiskey or two, not compared to 15 years ago when I get fairly lit up before playing, a few things ease that. I don't really get nerves, but I do is I get very, very fucking wound up. Mm-hmm. And that's you need a sort of calmness of thought sometimes to just go, "Oh yeah, here's the next bit." Because just like Solstice, Primordial has big long parts where you're just standing there going, "Okay."
Yeah.
And then because it's like jumping off a riverbank and you might land with a foot in the river on the other side, but you've kind of misjudged. You've misjudged the width of the river, kind of thing, because you're not singing tight to any rhythmic structure. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of floating across a bit and landing, jumping across and landing. And that moment, it sounds weird to people, but if you're completely sober, either it's perfect or you go, what's the word again? Whereas if you're, so the problem is that I've all found is trying to turn down the volume on the coping mechanisms, such as having a drink or two and trying to be professional. And then the other side of me is going, you're better when you're Larry. You know what I mean? A little bit Larry.
Yeah. We call it a sharpener, right? Like, it doesn't hurt, does it, to have a little swig of whiskey before you're going on? It just calms. I think I'm much like you. I don't get nervous, but you do get very wound up. And I think also when you're completely sober and you're kind of very on the task, you can get too inside your head, and then that's when problems arise. Is when you're not just trusting in the kind of flow of things, when you're trying to control everything too much. So you almost need to lose a little bit of control.
I totally feel like that, and because that's it sort of fits into that sort of I suppose animistic sort of natural noisy vibe that Primordial sort of creates, where it's kind of loose and we never really quite play. It's not bum 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 ba, da, 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 da. So you don't really need, you can be loose. I never sing the same way twice at all. But did you find it was difficult then going from like the sort of acoustic nature of Wolcensmen then to having to sing over a full backline and all that kind of stuff? Because some of the Solstice singing is quite tricky, especially something like To Ride with Tear. I mean, this starts at a very, I don't know if have you been playing that live or not?
No, we've not been doing that one. But I know it may be on the cards in the future, but
God damn it.
We did also in Finland, we did bust out the Isen Tor song, Mighty and Superior.
Oh yeah, okay, this is high. That's the guy from Twisted Tower Dire, right? Who sang on that one.
Yeah. I mean, that's right at the top of my register. So that's it is tricky, and also, you know, stepping into the shoes of someone like Paul, you know, the previous singer in Solstice, who has a huge voice. You know, obviously, you know, good friend of yours, big guy with a big voice. You know, it's so you kind of like, on one hand, you're trying to hit the high notes of someone like Tony, who sang on Eastern Tour, and then on the other hand, you're trying to have that big voice of someone like Paul. Yeah,
I mean especially I mean, I would have said Paul's voice is even sort of bigger, wider than even the singing on the Mighty and Superior, especially on Death's Crown is Victory or something. I mean, this is a high start, you know. Again, like when I first heard that, I was like, fucking hell, sometimes you can create a bit of a rod for your own back, though, live, because I've done that with Primordial and with Dread Sovereign, especially with Dread Sovereign, where I write songs on the bass or the guitar, and then I've gone, fucking give it everything in the studio, and then you've got, for fuck's sake, now I have to play something that is going in a counter rhythm to what I'm singing, which isn't natural for me. But you're totally right. They are quite high things. How have you been finding that, though?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, and you know, this is something I know that you'll be able to sympathize with. But when you playing a few shows in a row, especially if your monitoring is not great, then you can risk blowing your voice out. And the first of the Finnish shows, the monitoring wasn't great. I use in-ear monitors, but the sound guy didn't really know what he was doing, and there were a few kind of monitoring problems, and so I kind of blew my voice out a little bit. Got to the second show, and it was the second show where we were going to do Mighty and Superior, and it's like, okay, right, you got to sing those right at the top of your register when your voice is, you know, kind of a bit, you know, done for from the night before. But it actually that went really well. I solved that by just doing a shitload of warm ups, a couple of swigs of whiskey, shitload of warm ups, and just also reminding yourself to not go in at 100%. You know, to hold back a little bit at the beginning of the set, so by the time you do get to those more difficult songs, you've still got some stamina left. Yeah, I mean, I always. I remember doing a tour in 2005 or 6 with Morning Beloved, obviously, you know, and you've got Frank there, who is, I think, one of the best natural singers that there is. He's a monster, you know, and he would get up and sing. Now, obviously, he's not singing a whole set, you know, but he would get up after like 2 hours sleep and just been partying 2 hours before and just bellow it out, you know. And what he always used to say to me was, your problem is that you worry too much, you're overthinking it. He was just like, it's there within you. Now, I believe him 75% or 50% in the sense that most of singing, I think, is about just having the confidence and the sort of thing to go, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. And I look forward to the hard parts. Whereas in 2005 or 6, I would have hid from some of the bits in coffin ships. And there certainly was gigs where before I'd really figured out what I was doing. Whereas now I'm like, I'm going to fucking smash this to bits. And you're really looking forward to, I have no fear of that, but part of that is just also having the confidence to go, well, this is what I do, you know. But it's a difference between you step from being a hobbyist to a musician, I suppose, you know, and that's a sort of platform that most people are sort of unwilling to make, because it makes it seem a bit more, a little bit more ego comes with that maybe. But Frank was always, he was there as like, look, shut the fuck up for a while, have a shot of, I always think like, a gargle a shot of salt water and then one of Jägermeister, shut the fuck up, then take a pint glass, put some bourbon in it, lemon, sliced ginger or ground ginger, cloves if you can get hold of it,
or one of those like lemsip or something like this, and dissolve it into this sort of, and honey, if you can find manuka honey as well. But the ground ginger and that kind of stuff. And if you drink like 2 or 3 of this, do your gargling, or as JB from Grand Magus, who is like just this monster singer, who's always like super calm, and you watch him and you're like, what the fuck? Because I'm like, full on pushing this out. He's just like, oh. And he would do this, the vowel, ooh, I, oh, it won't be much good to anybody not watching this on a video, but you sort of mouth vowels and you're moving the, oh, this kind of thing. But again, the frank advice of stop fucking worrying too much, because if you do worry, you're going to lose your voice. I think the power of suggestion probably works, that you go into your head, you go, yeah, I'm going to lose it. I'm not going to handle a song, because Mighty and Superior, that's a hard song to sing, certainly.
Yeah, and it is a lot about self-confidence as well, isn't it? I mean, obviously, singers get mocked for being cocky and whatnot, but you kind of have to be as a singer. It's a very pragmatic thing, and I mean, I'm not naturally a particularly kind of extroverted, overly confident guy, and I've kind of had to learn to be a bit more like that. To be a front man in a band, because if you go on stage without being confident in your abilities, then you will fail. You need to know that you can do it, and you also need to know that if you take a couple of missteps, then it doesn't matter. You know, it's the whole that matters. There might be a couple of bum notes in there. No one's perfect, and I'm an amateur. I'm not doing this professionally. I don't get to rehearse like 3 hours a day, like
same.
So it's a lot about confidence, and it definitely is about. You're right. It's a power of suggestion. If you spend all day before a gig thinking, "Oh, my voice is I'm allowed to swear. My voice is fucked. I'm not gonna be able to sing well tonight," then you probably won't sing well that night.
Yeah, and I think that also, the as well as the fact is, there's been gigs where I've played where I've sang the first verse really fucking poorly. It's even happened to me Beyond the Gates, like this year there was a monitor problem, like with my in-ears, and when I came out for the first song, there was no vocals in the monitor and the in-ears didn't work. It was just white noise, and so I started singing in the wrong place, and I was fucking so furious. I went to back behind the amps and I flung off the jacket. I'm shouting at the sound guy, and I had to take a moment and go, if you don't calm down, this gig in front of 3,000 people in the Greek Island will go to hell. You need to get a handle on yourself, because you've sung the first verse and the first song wrong. Now, the me of 15 years ago, that probably would have knocked an entire song and a half out of whack, or it could can knock your confidence for a whole gig, and you never quite recover. I often talked about that with Paul, who your predecessor in Solstice, and he would say that when he got a confidence knock in the first song and the monitors weren't right, like it can really whack you, especially in a big long Solstice song with like 8 verses, and you find yourself that moment you go, I'm lost. But that's what you learn over the years, to take a moment and go, all right, knock the next verse out of the park, and you're back in the game, But that one moment, where you go, because it's not like playing the guitar where you can go, fuck, I've missed the little finger is and you've played the wrong note. Now, of course, I do think with bands like Solstice and Primordial, there are people who love the music so much, they hang on every word. And if it's not like how they imagine, they get like really fucking, I've had people come and find me in Greece or in Germany, Alan, you've sang the first line of the first word has been wrong and blah, 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 which you're going to get so many, I'm sure you've got already, but you're going to have to look forward to that, the dude finding you at the bar to buy you a drink, but also tell you that you sang the song wrong.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that about mainland Europeans. It's a real kind of like character feature of them. I did at Prophecy Fest, because I did a Wolcensmen set the first night and the campfire stage. And the next day I had a French guy come and find me, and he was, it was great to see you. It was a great performance. You made a few mistakes. And it makes me laugh, that the candid nature of some of these fans who will just plainly tell you that, you fucked up a few times, but it's okay. I still enjoyed the set, whereas I would never dream of saying that to someone, but it's okay. I don't come away offended from it. In fact, I find it quite amusing, because we're well aware as musicians when we've made mistakes, and we're not under any illusions that other people have not noticed them.
But especially when I mean, that's one of the things that Paul often talked with me about, was the pressure, especially of something as beloved as New Dark Age, which, you know, let's be honest, is kind of like a timeless classic thing. I think Def Forever voted it, and they voted the most epic album ever made. It was like #1, I think, you know,
and now it's number 2000.
Yeah. Well, we can get into that, but no, but it was above Into Glory Ride and stuff. So you've got people hanging on, they're literally hanging on every inflection of every note. And I think Paul will be the first person to say that sometimes that was quite a well, it's quite a burden, you know. I used to think of Coffin Ships, and I used to be, you know, when we wrote it in 2004 or 5, and I was in the studio singing it, I was thinking to myself, this high bit is this hard now. And there'd be plenty of times where I fucked it up in those early days. And you look in the crowd and you could see people going, oof. And I thought I had to have a long kind of, you know, moment of sort of introspection somewhere, and we're made to the Nameless Dead and go, which are you? A musician or a hobbyist? Okay, you could be a musician who doesn't make a living out of being a musician, but you can still be a musician. And you have to accept the fact that if you've created this thing, you're gonna have to sing it properly and not duck out of the notes and duck out of that whole thing, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because, you know, we know those moments in the set which are difficult for us. Maybe there's a couple of particularly high notes, and we could do what, you know, Eric Adams does quite a lot these days and just don't sing those notes.
Yeah,
but I would rather try and fail than just not try at all, you know.
In fairness to Eric, though, I mean, he's what, 73, and they've tuned down a bit, but Eric still has a very strong voice, I think, you know. Okay, so there's super high ones like your Halfords and your, you know, I mean, and Eric at 74, 75, I'm not sure you'd expect him to really sing that high, you know.
I'm not dissing him at all.
I mean, to Eric.
Yeah, no, the only time that I've seen Manowar play was at Hellfest, I think in like 2011 or something like that, and he did seem to miss about half of the notes, which was disappointing. But I think maybe he was going through, who knows, maybe he was ill that day, you know.
No, it's perfectly true. And also I think it's very odd how, I suppose it's symptomatic of modern, you know, it's a sort of modern internet age that I always find this very weird. You know, if you make a video, you make, say Primordial makes a video, the fact that under the video are comments, it's kind of like if you can imagine in painting something and then leaving a space for people to write, this sucks, within looking at it for 2 seconds, just like in the corner. It's such a weird interaction. It's kind of like, here, I leave open my art for you to make a public comment on, even though you might have done it after 1 second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, or are saying fuck this guy because of something else completely, you know. But this it always strikes me as weird when people are like making comment under videos of bands who are clearly old now going, well, I can't sing anymore. It's like, well, yeah, Don Dokken can't sing because he's 73 and has had, like, you know, throat cancer and necrosis of the arm and some bowel, blah, blah, blah. And he's also 73, and you expect him to sing like the same as 86. It just seems to me to be just a sort of very odd way of exacting a sort of weird retribution or something on, you know, somebody just because of their, well, look, the grief of the aging process, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, and it's...
Was there a question there? I don't know.
No, I agree with you, and it's easy to be a critic, isn't it? It's you know, that old adage, you know, and especially behind a screen with an anonymous name, and that it's very easy to criticize. And obviously, you know, if you're a consumer of music, you expect the producers of music to be able to perform immaculately. Well, you expect them to be able to perform, but I think some people are a bit unrealistic about the fact that, you know, we're not robots, we're humans, and unless you're, you know, I've known classical musicians who, you know, practice for 8-9 hours a day because that's their job. They make a living from it. When they go and play as part of an orchestra, they make a living. But that's not what we as underground metal musicians do. And we're not able to do that. So there are going to be mistakes. And I think that people should focus on the spirit and the intent of it rather than, you know, the details.
Well, I think that's originally what people would have done, but I suppose what you've done is you've allowed this strange form of anonymous digital interaction with people that allows them to, as you say, anonymously make comment. There's no comeback. There's no, it doesn't cost you anything to be, as we've, may discuss, but the idea that all of these things just encourage or give the loud hailers to the most extreme voices in any particular commentary. But it's, as you say, it's easy to be a critic on all that kind of thing. But what is, we may talk about this in the second part of this, but what is the plan then? Are you start to write new songs with Solstice, or is that something that you can discuss, or all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, we've already begun writing songs. We've got one pretty much under our belt, which is, a typically long Solstice song. I think it's in excess of 10 minutes long. Yeah. And I mean, we signed with Prophecy Productions recently. So at some point they're going to be expecting us to record an album. And Rich, things don't happen quickly with Rich because he would rather get things right. And we're all on the same page with that. We don't want to rush out another Solstice album. It needs to stand up to the canon of the legacy that Solstice has. So yeah, we're busy doing it, and I think for the next 6 months we'll be focused on that, on writing songs.
Yeah, I mean, I had a brief conversation with Martin about Solstice when I met him in the USA, and I think prophecy makes sense for Solstice. And Martin isn't somebody who kowtows to public opinion.
Yeah, no, he's been very, very supportive. He's a great guy, and I've been a huge fan of Prophecy for since I was a teenager. It's probably the label that I've bought more records from than any other, I would say, just because they're an excellent curator of quality music of sort of various different styles. So I'm really pleased to be working with Prophecy.
All right, hang on. And so what will happen with the Wolcensmen thing? I mean, I saw that when you were in Winterfell, when you did the kind of like the acoustic thing here in Dublin. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, that worked pretty well. So can be a sort of a helpful addition or a little kind of addendum to Solstice getting a few festivals or something to kind of do the Wolcensmen the night before as you did at Prophecy, right?
Yeah, that worked really well because obviously, if I'm already traveling there, then I may as well bring an acoustic guitar and play a set. I mean, when you saw us in Dublin, I was doing a full band thing with Wolcensmen, so basically sharing, most of the live members with Winterfell. So, my ex-bandmates in Winterfell were helping out with Wolcensmen, plus a couple of different guys, and that was good. But logistically, that doesn't really make sense anymore in most circumstances because to get a cello player, a percussion player, at least another guitar player who can do vocal harmonies and a keyboard player, I don't have any of these people near me. These are people I'd have to pull together from various parts of the country.
Sure, yeah.
I'd have to, their travel would have to be paid for, their accommodation and everything. So it's just not very practical. So I went out at the beginning of 2020, just before the lockdowns started. And I went out with a backing track. So I recorded some vocal harmonies and put some synth pads on a backing track. Well,
you did a few video recordings during lockdown as well, didn't you? I watched one of them.
Yeah, I did one that was kind of like a what do you call it, like an opening party for what was it, Inferno? What's the big one in Norway?
Well, there's Inferno, and then there's
Inferno. It was Inferno. Yeah, it was like a kind of pre-party for Inferno. I was meant to be going over to Oslo to play that. Then obviously lockdowns happened, and my label Indie Recordings suggested, well, would you be interested in doing a live stream thing? So I thought, what the hell? And that was before everyone started doing those.
Yeah.
And that actually went pretty well. But yeah, I mean, that, if anyone's seen that is how I went out before lockdowns.
Sure.
But it worked pretty well. But I decided more recently that I don't like playing to a backing track. I just
Yeah.
really don't enjoy it. It's a very technical, mechanical way of performing, which doesn't really leave much room for enjoyment or improvisation or anything like that. So
Yeah.
when I played Prophecy Fest at the beginning of September, I just went up with a guitar. That was it, just me and a guitar, no backing vocals, no synths, nothing. So that's logistically that, and practically that's what I'd be doing in future with Wolcensmen. But people seem to like it, so yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean, we were people sort of asked Primordial, like, would you do a live stream and this kind of thing? And I think the only band I saw who really came out of it with something intact was Oranzi Pazuzu, did a very interesting live stream, but that was about it. And I just thought, like, we agreed sort of within Primordial, like, let's just put this whole thing on the shelf. And like, we didn't write songs. We didn't see each other. We didn't rehearse. We didn't really do anything because we just thought, well, and we may discuss some of this stuff in the next part, is the idea that, we started a band to be in a room with each other. And if the compromise is going to be that we're all going to be either remote, like the sort of rehearsing in different squares, trying to do a cover of something. If this is the compromise, then rather have no compromise, rather just leave it completely open-ended, And there was sort of some pressure to do something from, I'm not going to say from the label, but they certainly were wondering, like, well, what can you do to sort of keep things moving? But to me, it just felt like, well, this isn't keeping things moving. This is a sort of a compromise to something I fundamentally disagree with. So the idea that we should be reduced to being, 4 squares on a screen or 5 squares on a screen, purely for what, to drive some, clicks on the algorithm, we just sort of disappeared, from sight. We just sort of, obviously I started the podcast and that kind of thing, but as a band, we just sort of went, no, we're not going to take part in all that kind of stuff. And it feels better to have not done it, to be honest with you. Although I did understand, we took part in, we gave a live show at Partisan to this sort of 4 festivals, tried to come together to do some sort of online festival thing. And I guess that, what many people said to us, like, look, if you do a live stream, you'll be able to sell some merch off the back of it. And it's like, okay, that sounds a bit grim, really. That's really the reason why we would do this? Stand in it, hire an empty venue and stand there and pretend to play. But in the end, you don't sell any merch anyway from that kind of stuff anyway. So it all seemed to be a bit of a pointless compromise that I'm glad we didn't really take part in. But having said that, when I did watch that first, how do you say? I say Wolcensmen, Wolcensmen.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of people say Wolcensmen, but it should be Wolcensmen. It's
right.
It's an old. You'll be familiar with the album Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk.
Yeah.
So Wolken is.
Okay.
So it's an old English word, which means the heavens or the clouds. So it's strictly Wolcensmen, but I'm used to people saying Wolcensmen as well.
The problem with Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk is also, like, a whelk is a whelk. Like a whelk is like a little kind of oystery thing. Of course, if you're not familiar with where the word came from, it's not a word that fills you with fear and dread and trepidation. Welkin, it's it seems in hindsight something of an odd choice, to be honest.
Yeah, no, but what you were saying before, I think all of that live streaming stuff kind of comes from a place of desperation. The way I see it, labels were suddenly nervous that their bands weren't out, sort of churning that mill for them, and bands who are used to being constantly in the public eye were nervous that they suddenly weren't, and they might be forgotten because if every other band in their style is doing a live stream but they're not, then they're going to be forgotten. So I think it comes back to that kind of age-old issue as a musician in the modern age of are you content not being constantly in the public eye? Are you okay to step back and step into the shadows for a period of time?
Yeah.
And I think you guys did the right thing with that, because a band like Primordial, when you come back out, it's going to be a real cause for celebration. If you'd always been there, on everyone's screen throughout,
Yeah.
then there's no real kind of fanfare or excitement when you do step back out on stage.
Yeah, and it's a very, very poor excuse for actually traveling and interacting and being a musician, and well, not just that, just being a person exercising your inalienable rights to whatever you want to say, liberty and freedom and the movement and all that kind of thing, and the gathering of people together and just being human with each other. The idea that, oh, hey, your need for that is now replaced by this, I think would have made me more angry, that people have gone, oh, well, there you go, you've done your live stream. I think my mindset was my mind was in a completely other place than going like, oh yeah, I'm placated by that, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's going to be, some people watching this who are kind of bored by the fact that the first half of it, we just talked completely about music. But I would be quite happy to talk only about that, and then have people scratching their heads going, well, God damn it, where's all the juicy stuff that they imagine that we must talk about, when in reality, that's probably the first part is usually what we would talk about,
Yeah, absolutely.
But like I think there was, we can sort of step into this stuff a little bit, but what really sort of, I suppose, shocked me with all the things that happened, and I know that there's a great desire among many people to not go back into all that kind of stuff, because I do understand it's very wearisome and it mentally exhausted everybody. And the idea that I was only listening to somebody talking last night, there are two people arguing on a podcast about the origins of lockdown or the origins of COVID and all this kind of stuff, and you could see just a kind of weary form of resignation from the people who were listening, because people just wanted to leave it behind. But what I found incredible was the idea that it wasn't just to do with the metal scene necessarily, but so much of society just handed over their natural forms of skepticism that maybe even the week before all of this transpired, they were quite able to use, within reason, when it came to machinations of the state or industry or all these kind of things. That, I suppose, that's what the propaganda of fear does to people. But the idea that finding myself in a very small minority, and this is not to be smeared with, people were busy smearing, all of us, yourself and myself included, with anti this, anti that, which I just thought was, obviously it's bullshit. But the idea that everyone seemed to hand over their rational forms of skepticism without question. That was the most sort of brutally, how we say, very real sort of brutalist thing that kind of shocked me. It shouldn't have shocked me when I really dug down into it. And it was like, this is human nature. This is what people will do when they're afraid or whatever, or propagandized or whatever you want to say. But I was kind of like, oh, there's almost no resistance to this. Sorry, I've sort of planted a whole bunch of horror suggestion type things into the question there, but
yeah, I mean, I think both of those things come from the same place, the unwillingness of people to talk about what happened over the last 4.5 years, and the fact that they gave over their natural kind of skepticism. They both come from the part of the very practical part of the human mind, which just wants life to return to normal. So you don't want to question things too much if it means that it's going to make life difficult for you, and you don't want to return to a difficult period of time if it means remembering that things weren't how they should be or how you thought that they were. But I mean, I will never forget what happened over the last 4.5 years between 2020 and 2024. I mean, I'm half of Dutch ancestry, and my Dutch grandparents are still they were still alive in 2020, and I wasn't allowed to visit them. I wasn't allowed to travel to the Netherlands until last year. And my opa, my Dutch grandfather, passed away in October after a long period of dementia. So basically, I missed out on the last period of time when he was still lucid and still able to communicate, because I wasn't allowed. I was prevented from traveling from Britain to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And the people who prevented me from doing that are still in positions of power. So why would I forget that?
Yeah. And I think that there's so many complicated things to unpack with this. And I think that a lot of people who've chosen to try and forget all of it, they've also forgotten the things that, you know, people were required to attend funerals with their iPad, and they couldn't bury their loved ones, and they weren't allowed to hug their grandparents and old people. So all the things they've chosen to forgotten, and they've just chosen. I mean, I have a lot of conversations with this one with my oldest friend, and he just said to me, you know, because he has kids and all this kind of stuff. But what he did say is like, look, if I, and it does make sense. He goes, if I step to where you view the world, which is pretty dark, or if I'm skeptical of all forms of authority or all the impulses of this, you know, technocratic institutions that I think seek to, you know, have overreach into people's lives, I would find it very hard to function. I said to him, yeah, but I agree with you, but I can give you 50 examples off the top of my head as to why Big Pharma doesn't care about you. You know, they don't. And so I found that this whole moment in society, it pulled back the curtain, and it revealed to people something that many people chose not to observe, or they chose to fool themselves into thinking that these institutions and you know, had their best will or best interests at heart, which of course they don't. Not to say all of the people involved in all of them are like that. And this is one of the things that I try to do, is to try and measure the idea that two seemingly opposing points of view can be true at the same time. You know, the cognitive dissonance of not mistaking ignorance with evil, or whatever you want to say. You know, that sometimes things are just scared people trying to do the best they can, and then other things are grifters trying to make a lot of money, or authoritarian impulses and that kind of thing. But just like you, if somebody gets me fired up, I'll step back into the trenches to argue about the stuff. And you see people are like, oh God, this again, you know, like, because people do want to forget. But just as you say, many of the people that we know were unable to bury loved ones and all that kind of stuff. And these are the people forget all the rhetoric that was constantly surrounding them on all forms of media, and that kind of, they've forgotten very easily.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't just about COVID. There was a whole slew of things, like you rightly mentioned there. It was part of a wider technocratic agenda. And I mean, who can say that life now in the West in 2024 is better than it was in 2019? I mean, it's quite clearly objectively worse for the vast majority of people. You know, the state of the economy, war, everything like this. It's all part of a wider agenda. And I try not to kind of evangelize about this stuff to people anymore. And I never really did. I mean, I found my platforms where I could speak freely about this stuff, but I have no interest in forcing this conversation on people who don't want to have that conversation. But if people want to know my view on this stuff, or if anyone tries to, I don't know, if anyone tries to belittle the principles which I hold dear, and I'm sure many of which you hold dear as well, then I will respond to them. So I mean, it was a great unveiling, not just of the mindset of those in power, but of the common man. You know, and what I realized is that most people actually don't want freedom.
Yeah, I mean, this is what what's that J.P. Mencken quote? You know, I should have thought of the quote before I thought of his name. The average man doesn't want liberty; he wants to be kept safe. And I think that also one thing I really realized is I had a very illuminating conversation with my friend Brian, who does Sentinel Records. And we're sitting around sometime in the lockdown. It was like 3 a.m. And he said to me, Alan, you figured it out. you're somehow have fallen through the cracks to do the thing you love, which is playing in the band and traveling, and everything has been taken from you. That's why you're so fucking mad. He said, but for your average, or for a lot of people who just worked their job, hated their fucking job, had to deal with the dickheads from middle management, tell them what to do, they now have the time and space to read a book, learn the guitar, smoke weed, play video games, whatever they want, and they don't care about your concepts of liberty and freedom of speech. They're not interested, actually. And it was the first time that someone had really just went boomf, and it really encapsulated, oh yeah. And I was thinking, yeah, of course that's true. If you're working a 9 to 5 for whatever that you hate, you don't give a shit that I'm not allowed to go to Mexico next week and play my music I've made, or wherever, And of the people that all my friends, all the people that knew, I think I lost. I mean, with the exception of course, not getting into relatives who died and all that kind of thing, but your agency in the world as a traveling musician or entertainer, not really. You lost the most out of this, but plenty of people enjoyed it. They gained a lot. They also enjoyed the fact that if they were losing at things before, there was now a level playing field where you all lose. And there's one thing on the menu, and it's stay the fuck inside. And it revealed an awful lot of that about human nature to me as well,
Yeah, because a lot of people aren't comfortable socializing, right? They find it a very difficult thing to do. And they kind of force themselves to do it. But if, as you say, it becomes a level playing field where no one's allowed to socialize. Yeah. So now for a lot of people, it's great. Well, I can just stay at home. Yeah. But I mean, a realization that I had is that, if you look at humanity, most people fall into one of two camps in terms of their kind of reason for being. Most people are either a creator or a consumer. And that's not to say, obviously, people who create, they also consume. People who consume, they also create. And it's not to say that one is better than the other. But people who are creative need freedom, whereas people who are consumers, they need security, they need comfort. And the majority of people are consumers, and they were happy to just be given a safe place to consume. And that's what they were given during the lockdowns, a safe place to consume. Whereas people who are creative or try to push boundaries or anything like that, you can't do that without freedom. And you can't do that when you are prevented from going out and peddling your wares.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that an awful lot of it is, Western society, an aging Western society, where the main, let's say economic demographic is like 50, 55 plus, the main voting demographic, all that kind of thing. Like, and let's be honest, a kind of indulged Western society for the most parts. I think more freely handed over its liberty on those terms than other, than maybe some other societies. God damn it, what's going on? But yeah, I mean, I had an argument with a friend of mine, and he says the most important word in the English language is love. And I said, no, it's liberty, because you can love doing fucking evil things. The idea that, the emancipation of all forms of people from whatever you want to call it, from, sort of authoritarianism or the impulses of authoritarianism is what everybody fundamentally desires. And so these being the fact that these are the things that were people handed over so freely first, I think scared an awful lot of free thinking people who had thought there might be more resistance. And I don't know whether that speaks to the fact that people just have these internalized online lives now, where at times staying inside seems like a better option, or living through your avatar maybe seems like a better option. But it certainly turbocharged the polarity in society. I think there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and I think most people assumed that everything would go back to normal. They assumed that this was a very, very temporary state of affairs. Whereas someone like me and yourself, I think, we suspected very strongly, or perhaps knew or believed that we knew, that this was the beginning of a new paradigm. This was a paradigm shift, and it was there to set precedents for the future. And I mean, I firmly believe that we were right to suspect that, because it's everything to do with movement, everything to do with the economy, everything to do with the whole climate scare. All of these technocratic policies, they've all accelerated in the wake of COVID. And yeah, as a father of three, I worry about what kind of world my children are inheriting from us, and that's why I care. And I think a lot of people who maybe have children of their own or do care about the future, if they'd suspected as we did that the measures in response to COVID, whatever COVID was or wasn't, they suspected that if they suspected that those measures weren't absolutely temporary, that they weren't just going to be something which was a blip in history, then maybe they would have been more maybe they'd have had a more bleak outlook or a more pessimistic outlook as we do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think the thing is that I think that, again, I think it's very important to hold the middle ground between, to try and also configure the opposing points of view, or also to place yourself sometimes in the middle of those things. Now, I mean, one of the things that got leveled against me was the idea that I was believing conspiracy theories and that kind of thing, And I would say to whoever I was arguing with, well, okay, give me a theory that is a conspiracy theory. Of the biggest one is JFK or the moon landing or this, that, the other. And what does that really mean? What is the word, this concept? I think that in the last 10 years, just the idea that saying everything is a conspiracy theory is a kind of lazy way of saying, well, we don't really need to discuss that then. We don't really need to rationally evaluate all sides of the argument. We don't need to use to sort of empirically go through statistics or whatever. It's just easier to say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist, and so therefore I don't need to speak to you about this. But I totally agree with you. I think that in the fullness of time, what happened may be seen in modern history as one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, almost like the fall of the Berlin Wall or something like this, where, as you say, the paradigm did shift. Now, of course, on the other hand, you have to be fair to say some part of it is just bureaucracy, civil bureaucracy, scared middle management people making decisions way above their pay grade, fear, stupidity, ignorance, also well-meaning people with good intentions. All these things are mixed up together, in the sense that I have sort of had to take a kind of step back from a sort of measured anger that I had to try and put both sides of the argument. Of course, I'm like you. I'm very much on intellectually on one side of this thing, but maybe it's because I always looked at society and politics and the nature of power and authoritarianism as somebody who's always very interested in history, as like, oh, this didn't surprise or shock me how power gravitates towards taking more power under the guise of economics or whatever you want to say. Of course, this is what happened. Whereas trying to discuss that with somebody who has never, I don't mean to be patronizing, but maybe never really thought that that's how the cogs of history work, I found exasperating and anger making. So I've had to step back from the anger making and the exasperating to try and say, okay, well, these are the same institutions that were, I think using telling you to stay inside, the same people in positions of power that, for example, in Ireland, the month before, there was a huge cervical smear cancer scandal where tons of women died, through negligence by the same health service. And so a week before, my buddies playing football were, after the game, shouting about how negligent and how useless. The same people, they were then shouting at me to trust with this huge piece of life-changing and all life-altering, law. And I was going, well, hey, hang on. What about what you were saying last week? And you realize, like, okay, how quickly people will not assess these two different cases and judge them accordingly. Sorry, again, a rather rambling non sequitur, but do you see what I mean? You know?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to whether you trust authority or not. And my default position is that you should always be at least have a healthy skepticism of
Yeah,
those who have any control over you. I mean, why would your default position be any different from that?
yeah, yeah.
If it is, you're leaving yourself in a very, very vulnerable position. And it you know people have always sought more power and more control. And those who have some power and control, well, why wouldn't we assume that they're seeking more of it? I mean, that's the position that I came at this from. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, these people. I mean, I back in the what was it, early 2000s, I was kind of loosely part of this No to ID campaign, because Tony Blair wanted to introduce a national ID card,
Yeah.
and I mean, I didn't really get particularly involved, but I stuck stickers up and
Yeah.
tried to kind of spread the word about it. So when COVID came along, and the first murmurs of you have to prove your status to enter this establishment or that establishment, my mind instantly went, okay, right, well, this could be a very
And it was,
devious way of introducing some form of ID or digital ID or whatever.
yeah. And Tony Blair was somehow lurking in the shadows of that once again,
Yeah, indeed.
And
yeah.
I mean, the arguments I had with my friends, like Tony Blair is a good example. I mean, weapons of mass destruction invades Iraq. And then, if you find yourself as a citizen on the same side of the argument as these people, which many people did, and from the other side of the fence, I'm telling them like, hey, you should come over to this side of the fence. I know it's more comfortable on that side. I mean, maybe that metaphor doesn't really work, but if you are standing on the same side of the argument as those people, I think it's probably something wrong, because you probably need to question where you are.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying standing up to the opposite side of the argument as, all doctors and physicians and all this kind of stuff, and people who are really trying to do things on a communal basis or society, small society basis, to make things like, I have cousins and stuff working in hospitals, and I got, lots of inside stories and track from them. That's one thing, that's the kind of nature of, I think, the powers that we're talking about, pitting people against each other, which in the fullness of time, I tried to step back from in relation to this whole, lockdown argument. But the idea that you're talking to your friends and you're going, you realize who you're on the same side of the fence as. People who don't have your best interest at heart. They really don't.
Yeah. Claiming to be anti-establishment. And
it blew my mind, and we can talk about it, especially in the metal scene. I was like, okay, we're singing about rebellion, but really?
Yeah, well, that's why I coined a phrase at the beginning of all this, sheep in wolves' clothing, because that's how I saw most of the metal scene. These people who they go out in their leather and their chains and their spikes and whatnot, looking dangerous, but actually being incredibly obedient citizens, and I just can't understand that. I could never understand that. I don't understand the idea of considering yourself anti-establishment, and yet, as you say, well, you're sitting on the same bench as Tony Blair, even Donald Trump. These people who, so they despise authoritarianism, they despise fascism, the right wing, etc. But everyone of the establishment, left or right, whatever they called themselves, were all on the same side of this. So that's an opportunity when, if you're truly anti-establishment, you say, well, okay, if both the left and the right factions of the establishment are on the same page with this, why am I automatically following them there? Why am I not stepping? And I'm not saying that you should automatically go against them, but give yourself space to kind of assess the situation and actually work out whether they're telling you the truth or not.
I think the space thing is very interesting, because I think we were basically propagandized to not feel like we had any space. We didn't have a moment's thought. It was just, this is what's happening now, emergency. And that's, you know, this, what's this book? It's called The Nudge. Have you heard of this?
It's about the nudge theory.
Yeah, well, it's kind of written by the people who, I suppose, evangelize it. The idea that the public needs to be nudged into making difficult decisions, and if they,
Yeah.
you either propagandize through fear, or you motivate them through other means. And I agree with you. And it's not just to be cantankerous and to be to always go against everything. But my nature was always to question, to try and consider, and to be rationally, at least as much as I tried to be, skeptical, but also to try and be devoid, or as best I could, to be stoically devoid of an emotional interaction with arguments. Maybe that's just my personality, to try and, I mean, that may sound very black metal, but to try and avoid being emotionally entangled in, or be emotionally played into taking one side or the other. And all around me, I saw, very clever people behaving like that. And I just, again and again was found, okay, but like, skeptically, you must have some healthy skepticism of the motivations behind some of what's happening, whether it's the profit margins of pharma or whatever it is, or, this idea that in the beginning, you're sold the flatten the curve model. And then I said to my friends at the time, this is going on for years, mark my words. And they all laughed at me and said, what the fuck are you talking about? I said, no, just watch. Sure enough, 2 years, 5-6 months later, there we still were. And many, many people quietly came back and went, yeah, you were right, or not right, but at least right to be skeptical, or at least question. And that was the biggest thing for me. Now, like, regardless of the getting into the ethics of, of vaccination, or the ethics of lots of other things, it was more on a societal scale, the idea that, as you say, great institutions of power just move the public around. And if public opinion had been very strongly against, after a year and a half, open society up, they probably would have done it. But because they propagandized people into getting their 65% of people to go, I still think we need to keep this locked down. They just went, well, see, look, I don't know. Again, another random ramble of a few sentences, But what I found, what I meant to ask you was, again, like you with the metal scene, I found like it quite astonishing, the amount of people who didn't want to hear somebody to hear another side of the argument, or even have a debate. It's not so much. I'm like I said, I don't consider myself a conspiracy theorist. I don't consider myself anti-vax. I don't consider myself any of those things. But what I am skeptical and wanting to question is the nature of authority. And the idea that many people, my friends and lots of punk friends, just was like, wow, has everyone just shelved this? I find myself, you find yourself in an even smaller minority than you thought you were in.
Yeah, well, you mentioned being called a conspiracy theorist. I've reached a point, and pretty much over the last 4 years, where I really, genuinely, truly don't care what anyone calls me. It doesn't matter to me anymore. If someone calls me a conspiracy theorist, if they call me whatever they want to try and call me, it really doesn't matter, because as far as I'm concerned, actions speak louder than words. And I know that I've been reasonable throughout this whole situation. And the people who know me know that I've been reasonable throughout this whole situation. So it really doesn't bother me. And, it's been good to kind of make some new friends and new alliances, for people like I've become very good friends with Rob Miller from Amebix and Tau Cross. Now, Rob is obviously, in some circles, a persona non grata. And, I'm not necessarily saying that he and I see eye to eye on everything. I'm sure we don't. But just to be to be associated with free thinkers again, to realize that there are some people who do have the courage to give themselves that space to appraise the situation and see, well, is this right or not? And those who don't. So, as you said earlier, it's been a great sort of revealing
The other,
situation.
and also personally revealing in the sense that to, so as it doesn't just sound like two buddies agreeing with each other. I would also hold my hand up and acknowledge that, I got played also by my algorithm. I got played by my own sense of anger and injustice. And, I still hold, reasonably fast to most of the things I thought, whether it was in relation to authoritarianism or, the overreach by the state or, all this kind of stuff. But I would hold my hand up and say, yeah, I did also go a little bit mad during this time. And I think that it takes a certain amount of self-reflection to kind of go, okay, to try to also see the other side of things and the other point of view and try and sort of meet people in the middle. And I think that the last couple of years of going out and playing and touring again and meeting people and having discussions in bars and having discussions over a drink with people, you realize very, very strongly, and what I do very much feel is that it's not been, I've not had an interest in, how we say, creating more enemies. I found that I think that the divide and conquer that was played upon us, if I'm standing at the bar and somebody says to me, yeah, you're a fucking this, that, the other, I go, well, let's have a whiskey and talk about it. And after 20 minutes, you realize, because I've had to step back from moments of the things that I thought and go, well, we're being played here. This divide and conquer nature of keeping society at completely loggerheads. I'm not a man who holds grudges. And so I thought, well, all right, let's the last couple of years, let's actually speak to some of the people who maybe the 2 years previous. I never did much arguing online or anything like that. The whole point of doing a podcast, because it was a monologue that I didn't have anybody answering back to. That's the kind of beauty of it. Here's my opinion, digest it as you wish. But we don't have a forum to argue with each other because I wasn't really interested in that. But the idea that if we fall into just still these sort of just fighting between us all the time, I think
being reactionary all the time,
and polarized, then they've won, kind of.
Yeah.
So I've tried to heal a bit with my friends that I fought with, and tried to heal a bit with arguing with people. I still don't think I'm wrong, but to try and be maybe a bit more magnanimous, especially maybe it's being a bit older and stuff like that. Still keep the anger, and I'm very much on the same side of things as yourself, but it feels like it's been good to sort of have some other conversations in the last 2 years as well, though.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I've had a few similar things. I said some things over the years which were probably a bit too sort of hardline, a bit too kind of black and white at the time, and now I'm a lot more kind of nuanced about it and more relaxed. And like yourself, I really welcome those opportunities to enter into discussion with someone who does hold a different view.
Yeah.
I had this year at Prophecy Fest, I had a lady come up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm a huge fan of your music. Some of my friends think that you're this and you're that. And I don't agree with those kinds of people." Meaning the people that I was being accused of being. But I like to speak to people before I make a decision about them. And so I had a good chat with her. We didn't really kind of get into any big topics, but I think she came away from it realizing that I'm not a monster. And last year I was introduced to a guy I think he was called Tim, a German guy at Prophecy Fest, and he introduced himself to me by saying, my name's Tim. I disagree with almost every view that you hold, or what he believed that I held, but he was still willing to have a conversation with me. And we had a very civil discussion about certain things. And, I was very honest with him. He was very honest with me. And I think, again, we both came away from that realizing that neither of us were monsters, that actually we're fundamentally both decent guys who just maybe have a slightly different perspective on the world. And I agree with you. I mean, the divide and conquer was definitely a big part of the agenda over the last few years, and we needed, and we still need to try not to play into that.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a big part of the last 2 years. When I first came back out of everything and started touring again, my anger was fucking so palpable on stage and so was really up to 90. And then I won't say it dissipated, but I got a better handle on it. And then also, going back out touring, playing with bands who have maybe philosophies I disagree with some fundamentally. And you realize that, it's exactly that. A form of conciliation or having some form of intellectual rigor with somebody that you maybe, I think we've often been played into thinking we disagree with, I think is a very important part of dealing with this situation. Because if we're all at loggerheads, and this is why I always say that, rational skepticism and just the principles of freedom of speech are really the reason why I started doing the podcast. And too many people have kind of forgotten that. And that also includes defending the right of the freedom of speech for the people you disagree with the most, should be the one that you most value. And that's why I had this kind of modern heavy metal obsession with, cancel culture, whatever you want to say, even though that's a kind of outflanked word a little bit now. I think it's become, dangerous and difficult, especially considering the subject matter of heavy metal. In 1986, I didn't expect to agree with Bruce Dickinson's politics, and I don't think anybody really, they didn't think that, the bands I like, the artists I like, are supposed to only reflect my view of the world. I mean, it's just such an intellectually redundant concept that will, will lead to the fact that you get very few, art itself will become this sort of redundant concept,
Yeah, and this is what makes me angry about being misrepresented. I mean, I said I don't care what people call me, but that's different from being misrepresented, from having outright lies told about you. I mean, buzzwords are one thing, but having people say you have said or you believe X, Y, and Z, it makes me angry, because actually the people who would be hurt by those positions that I'm accused of taking, I have no quarrel with whatsoever. I actually feel nothing but compassion for them. So to be accused of being someone who would, indiscriminately, or rather discriminately, hate someone just for being this or that, when it's not true, is frustrating, because in actuality, I would probably find common ground with that person. And I certainly wouldn't wish any harm upon them.
No, I think you definitely would. I think we definitely do. It's just the polarized nature of modern society, where people are encouraged to, through, this sort of clickbait, sort of shortened attention span ideal of just accepting a headline as the truth, or, this sort of whatever, this post-truth, which is now a misinformation sort of world we're about to move or are inhabiting already. You're not encouraged to do any sort of investigating yourself. And again, this just encourages the polarized nature of keeping us sort of at loggerheads. And I think it's in their best interest for people to concentrate on the things they think they have, that they disagree with, and the things they're going to find common ground with. Because if we all did that, then we go back to realizing, like, oh, you guys are the problem, that, or you would be able to recognize. I think a lot of it is post-Occupy movement, the pivoting by all those companies who society rightly recognized as, sort of enemies of society. They went, okay, let's just buy all of that element of society off. And then we're going to have the modern social media digital age in the last 10 years, and we're going to get people very young. And so all of those companies that society recognized as being sort of enemies, for want of a better word, of society, they've now co-opted it and bought it. And an awful lot of people now want those same companies to adjudicate and judge and, measure their lives in a sense where once they wanted to be emancipated from their overreach.
Yeah, and that's what this whole stakeholder capitalism thing is about, isn't it? So corporations are no longer being judged by their profit margins, but they're being judged by how well they fit into the social narrative. Exactly. And they're doing a very good job of feigning being on the side of the people when the truth couldn't be further from that.
Well, once upon a time, we talked about the transparency of governments and companies. Now those companies are talking about our transparency. And also, while they talk about, as you say, culture war issues, people have stopped talking about how much they're paying people in their sweatshops in developing countries. That used to be what we talked about. Now, who mentions that anymore? who mentions their, their payment practices and what they're doing in the third world. No, they have now found a perfect platform through which to, I think, ideologically hoodwink people.
Yeah, did that company support Black Lives Matter? Yes, okay, they're fine then. We don't need to look any further at them, right?
We don't need to examine what they're paying people in the Philippines.
No.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we've said enough in the last half an hour to probably get us into some amount of trouble.
Was it ever going to be any other way?
No, not really. But I think in the interest of, I think conciliation, most people should probably realize that we are all realistically standing on the same patch of ground. And I think we should all concentrate on what we have more in common than we don't,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.